Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Sanborn, the President and CEO of Children at Risk. We are a statewide advocacy group, and today we're having a gathering of experts from around the state to focus on immigration and what we're seeing as sort of a negative impact on families and children. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're doing this jointly with the Texas Immigration Legal Counsel, which we're excited to do. I'm Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk. With us today for our press conference, Krystal Gómez. She's the managing attorney at the Texas Immigration Legal Counsel. Welcome, Krystal. Thanks for being here. Jennifer Williams is with us. She's the executive director of HOME, the Humanitarian Outreach for Migrant and Emotional Health. We're excited to have you here as well, Jennifer. Also joining us is Dr. Jody Berger Cardoso. She's the professor of Cantambu Lighting Endowed Professorship for Leadership and Change at the Graduate College of Social Work at the University of Houston. Thank you so much for being here, Jody. We may have someone else join us a little bit later, but for now, we're going to focus on this. We're excited to talk about this, but we're actually, we feel a little traumatized ourselves in talking about this, because what we're seeing happening with ICE across our country is that, of course, we want to make sure that hardened criminals, if they're immigrants, are kicked out of our country. But what we're seeing too much of is sort of this impact on families and certainly children, a negative impact. When we see children incarcerated or detained, and for the periods of time that we're seeing a very negative impact on them and their well-being. So when we start thinking about that impact on children and families, we're talking about American children in 90% of the cases. Maybe they have a parent who's an immigrant. Maybe they have grandparents who are foreign born. But we know that they are being traumatized. And what we need to do is make sure that we have policy in our country that prioritizes children and families, no matter where their parents or grandparents come from. We know that it's in everyone's best interest when children learn to love their country. We know that we want them to be productive citizens and part of our vibrant economy, not only in Texas, but across the country. And we don't want them to learn to fear law enforcement, to fear the government. We don't want them to think that those people are their enemy. These are basic building blocks for success in America. Yet when we look at what's going on, we're seeing these building blocks being torn down block by block. So we have to understand that local and federal leaders really must center child, family, and community well-being in their immigration policy decisions. And that is not happening as we speak. So we understand what's going on. We only are interested, though, in making sure that this public policy is focused on children. We see documented case after case that's showing these kids are traumatized. But even with the documentation, every parent understands that when there's parent and child separation, children suffer. Every parent understands that you don't want trauma for your child. So every parent understands what's going on here, and we need parents to stand up and say, yeah, this policy is wrong when it comes to children and families. Yet most people are just standing by as this goes on. So we want immigration enforcement to focus on genuine public safety interests, not children or families that are seeking stability. One of the things that we care about at Children Risk is that public policy should protect children, not traumatize them. And right now what we see is this trauma that's happening. And I'm not talking about just what we're seeing in Minneapolis, which we see as a horrendous thing. We're talking about what we're seeing in Texas. We're seeing children being separated from the families, children being kept aside from others. And these are things that are not working for the children or for the families in Texas. So let's go and let's hear from a couple of our experts as we move forward. Krystal Gómez is here, managing attorney from the Texas Immigration Legal Counsel. Krystal, give us your take on what's going on here.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Good morning. My name is Krystal Gómez, as Dr. Bob mentioned. I'm the managing attorney at the Texas Immigration Law Council. I've spent my career, about 15 years now, representing families trying to survive inside the system that is already confusing, slow, and stacked against them. What we're seeing now, however, is something more dangerous. There's been a deliberate move away from the rule of law and toward policies that are knowingly traumatizing children. and then treating that harm as just acceptable collateral damage. What we're all bearing witness to right now isn't targeted enforcement against genuine threats to public safety, which is what we've been sold, is this idea that immigration enforcement targets people who are dangerous. Instead, we're seeing a systematic campaign that's deliberately separating families and traumatizing children in an effort to get people to self-deport or to not fight their cases. In Minneapolis, as Dr. Bob was saying, parents are being detained at bus stops while dropping off their children at school. 20% of students, that's about 5,500 kids there, have expressed interest in moving to online learning because they're afraid of enforcement activity in their neighborhoods. And we've been seeing parents joining together to keep watch outside of their neighborhood elementary schools to protect their community from this ICE enforcement. Nationally, over 3,800 kids have been detained by ICE this year alone. That's more than the previous 4 years of enforcement activity combined. At the South Texas Family Residential Center, which is in Dilley, here in Texas, families have been engaged in lawsuits that have alleged that the conditions in those facilities are something that no one should have to endure, much less children. They've reported moldy food, worms in food, inadequate medical care, and then children, as a result, have been emotionally withdrawing. They've stopped eating, stopped playing, they start disappearing into themselves. These policies are causing not just immediate harm, but they're also creating lifelong harm. These kids fall behind in school, families lose housing and jobs and stability due to detention and increased detention. All that trauma interferes with learning and emotional regulation and the trust that kids have in their institutions, and they can shape the entire course of a child's life. So when the government chooses this, they choose detention, deportation, violence, separation of families, it's knowingly inflicting this harm and trauma on kids. We used to have this thing called the Flores Settlement Agreement that existed to prevent exactly this kind of harm on kids. It recognized a very simple and powerful truth that kids don't belong in jails and should be in the least restrictive environment available. And now we're seeing kids held for months at a time in these detention facilities. Um, and at the same time, they're trying to dismantle the Flores Agreement altogether with the concept that, well, it's not the government's fault that the parents brought their kids in. It's not the government's fault that they're inflicting this kind of trauma onto these children. And that's not how due process works, and it's not how morality works. We don't say that US citizen kids lose their constitutional rights just because their parents are undocumented. Um, they have a right to due process. All kids have a right to be free from arbitrary government action. They have a right to be free from inadequate detention conditions. We don't condition a child's right or safety or health on their parents' immigration history. We're also seeing lots of coercive tactics trying to force families to self-deport altogether. And these US citizen kids are having their due process rights violated, and they end up deported to countries that they've never known. So we're speaking today because these aren't just policy failures, they're also legal and moral failures. And our federal leaders have to return to an immigration enforcement system that respects the law, including the rights of children and families to due process, ending family detention in facilities that are proven to harm kids, and restore the protections for sensitive locations like schools and hospitals so that kids can learn and families can heal. We want immigration enforcement to focus on genuine threats to public safety and not parents dropping their kids off at school or people seeking medical care, and never ever kids.
Great.
Thank you.
Krystal, very briefly, ¿nos puede hablar un poco en español sobre qué son las cosas más importantes para que la comunidad latino y nuestros padres saben lo que está pasando?
Gracias. Sí. Lo que estamos viendo hoy no es una aplicación de la ley enforzada de inmigración en preguntas de seguridad nacional. Esto es una campaña sistemática que está separando familias y traumatizando a los niños. Estas políticas no solo causan daño inmediatamente, pero este daño puede tardar por toda la vida de ese niño o esa niña. Y estas prácticas violan las protecciones legales que han existido por años y años. Y estamos aquí ahorita preguntando que la agencia federal, que ellos enfocan para atrás en la gente que ellos dicen son prioridades, que pueden ser daño a la seguridad comunitario y no en los niños y familias.
Gracias, Krystal. Let's go to Jennifer Wolf Williams. Jennifer is the executive director of HOME, which is the humanitarian outreach for migrant emotional health. Jennifer, from your perspective, give us your take on what's happening with ICE families and children.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, these are frightening times, even for adults, and the fear is compounded for children in vulnerable families and communities. They face severe distress and uncertainty. Some children witness the abduction of their parents and suffer the shock of life without them, and all children sense collective fear. At home, we see the effects of this loss in the youngest babies who regress in their development, school-aged children afraid to leave their parents each morning, and teens who stop talking to their closest friends. Children understand that their family is being targeted for being who they are, and this creates a crisis of identity and is itself a form of trauma. Yet the government does not recognize these types of traumas when we testify on behalf of the children in immigration court, and the government does not recognize this trauma in its creation of policy and practice. Research on childhood trauma is clear. It can cause long-term psychological harm and leave children vulnerable to severe medical conditions. But research also shows that the consistent presence of a trusted adult can reduce these harms and help children build resilience. So I'm grateful for those of you who are caretakers, and I'd like to offer a few basic principles to help you support children in the current cruelties. First, reassure children truthfully. Let them know there are many people who care about them and will look out for their well-being. Second, listen when they want to talk. Let them know, take their concerns seriously and let them know you want to hear what they're thinking. Third, answer their questions at their level of understanding. Short answers are best, but invite them to ask more questions if they want to. It's fine for adults to say we don't know, but we should never avoid the conversations. Fourth, be supportive. Let them know that their feelings are normal and other people feel the same thing. Fifth, create a plan. Discuss what you and your child will do in an emergency and how you will find the help you need. And care for yourself as well. Adults need to practice good self-care for our own well-being and as a model to our children. And finally, I have a message for those of you who create laws and policies, and for those of you who vote. Change your priorities. Recognize the trauma. The well-being of children should never be an afterthought. Protecting the well-being of children and of vulnerable adults is core to being human.
Jennifer, ¿nos puede hablar un poco en español sobre lo que estás hablando?
Sí, estos son tiempos difíciles incluso para los adultos y el miedo se agrava para los niños de familias y comunidades vulnerables. Algunos niños presencian el secuestro de sus padres y sufren el trauma de vivir sin ellos, y todos los niños perciben el miedo colectivo. En Home vemos los efectos de esta pérdida en los bebés más pequeños, que retroceden en su desarrollo, en los niños en edad escolar, que tienen miedo de separarse de sus padres cada mañana, y en los adolescentes que dejan de hablar con sus amigos más cercanos. Los niños entienden que su familia está siendo atacada simplemente por ser quienes son. Esto crea una crisis de identidad y es una forma de trauma. Las investigaciones sobre el trauma infantil son claras. Puede causar daños psicológicos a largo plazo y dejar a los niños vulnerables a graves problemas de salud. Pero la investigación también muestra que la presencia constante de un adulto de confianza puede reducir esos daños y ayudar a los niños a desarrollar resiliencia. Les agradezco a ustedes, cuidadores, y me gustaría ofrecer algunos principios básicos para ayudarles a apoyar a los niños. Número 1, calmen a los niños con sinceridad. Háganles saber que hay muchas personas que se preocupan por ellas y velarán por su bienestar. Número 2, escúchenlos cuando quieren hablar. Tomen en serio sus preocupaciones y háganles saber que quieren escuchar lo que piensan. Número 3, respondan a sus preguntas a su nivel de comprensión. Las respuestas cortas son los mejores, pero invítenlos a hacer más preguntas si lo desean. Número 4, sean solidarios. Háganles saber que sus sentimientos son normales y que otras personas sienten lo mismo. No están solos. Número 5, creen un plan. Discuten lo que ustedes y sus hijos harán en una emergencia y cómo encontrarán la ayuda que necesitan. Cuídense también a ustedes mismos. Los adultos debemos cuidar nuestro propio bienestar y así ser modelos para nuestros hijos. Finalmente, tengo un mensaje para quienes creen leyes y políticas y para quienes votan. Cambien sus prioridades. El bienestar de los niños nunca debe ser algo secundario. Proteger el bienestar de los niños y de los adultos vulnerables es fundamental para la condición humana.
Muchísimas gracias, Jennifer. Let's go to Dr. Jody Berger Cardoso. Jody is a professor at the University of Houston. She is the Cantambu Latting Endowed Professorship for Leadership and Change at the Graduate College of Social Work, a fine institution. Jody, give us your take on everything that's happening and the impact on children and families.
Good morning, Dr. Bob. Buenos días con todos. I would like to emphasize a couple of areas that my research over the last 15 years has shown, my research in collaboration with other researchers and other social work practitioners. First is that there are no adequate screenings and mental health processes by which children can be treated for trauma in detention. Detention itself is against the human rights of children. And if we look at the United Nations rights of the child, that is very clearly indicated, and decades of research suggest that detaining children is both unlawful, but also extremely damaging to their overall mental health, but also their physical health across the life cycle. Also, we know that the longer children are detained, the more challenges they have while in detention. So Ms. Gómez mentions, our attorney Gómez mentions the Flores Agreement. We've seen increases in the amount of time that children are detained. So during previous administrations, children were detained for less amount of time. That would be better than what we're seeing now with average lengths of stay starting at 100 days. So children are detained, they're detained for longer amounts of time, and that detention has adverse effects on their mental and physical health. How does it affect their mental and physical health? These children are already, those that migrate to the US are already compromised, being exposed to extreme hardship and extreme trauma, already in critical areas and periods of development. And then through their migration journey and their detention processes, that trauma is compounded, creating what we researchers refer to as toxic stress. Toxic stress in the body can persist over long periods of time and can lead to psychiatric conditions like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even at its extreme spaces, psychotic disorders. We also know that children with ongoing stress can't learn because it affects the frontal lobe, and people can't manage their executive functioning, like sitting in a chair and retaining information. So even in spaces where children may have access to learning environments in detention, their neurobiology will be such that these toxic experiences of stress in their body will preclude them from being able to really learn. My research has been really clear over the last, 8 years that separating children or even serial migration in the context of family separation can really have long-term effects on child development. It affects, again, their neurobiology through experiences of toxic stress, but it also makes them vulnerable to the challenges that kids who are unprotected face, like ongoing child abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, things as such. And we know that those things have long-term effects on child well-being and physical health. Also, we know that it affects how children form and develop relationships, their capacity to interact in the world, their capacity to trust and build healthy relationships. We see a lot of subsequent trauma in children who have experienced these ongoing challenges. We have a study that was published by with the University of Houston, myself as the PI, and the Migration Policy Institute, where we looked at the effects of immigration enforcement on the mental health of children, a lot of those children being U.S. citizen children. And we found that even U.S. citizen children prior to the current administration had a fear of being deported and detained. They didn't know their rights. They had higher rates of anxiety and depression. They feared their parents would be deported. They feared they would be left behind and wouldn't know what would be of their childhoods. These effects were really present even through the Obama administration and the first Trump administration, and now are entirely overtaking communities. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fight or flight in the bodies that we're seeing families. And really, we're seeing some real complex social problems that even social workers are having trouble finding solutions to. Like, what happens when a 17-year-old, their parents have been deported, both of their parents have been deported, and they're in their senior year of high school and they're U.S. citizens with a pathway to college? What happens to them? Where do they go? Do we call Child Protective Services because they're left supervised? Like, there are all kinds of social complex problems that we're facing with children losing not just one parent, but both parents and older siblings on top of it. So this dissolution of families is really going to be a complex problem that the U.S. is going to face, not just now, but for years to come. And I really want to highlight this. This is probably my last point. The U.S. government knows that family separation creates toxic stress. They've made an outward decision to do that. And the reason I know that is because there were lawsuits after the first set of zero tolerance policies, where we were able to prove the effects of these policies on the mental health of children, children who were not sick prior to these implementations of policy and became sick because of them. And there were damages paid to these families. There was acknowledgement that family separation negatively affected them. Children languished in ORR care, or Office of Refugee and Resettlement Care, while their parents were deported. They were left behind in the United States. There are some children who have yet to make contact with their parents in countries of origin. So we have some real complex problems, and we have some real knowing that the policies and practices that we're implementing cause damage. So I really want to lean into Dr. Wolf Williams's perspective from home that this is more than just a policy question or a what to do question. This is a morality question where children have the right to be safe and to be in their homes without fear of removal. And so I also encourage, both based from that perspective, but also from my own research, seeing over time what happens to children who have experienced these experiences, is that I really urge people to reconsider the practices that I'm seeing today, which are even more egregious than they've been in years past.
Yeah. Jody, thank you very, very much for that perspective. And I don't want to ask you an answering question, pero usted habla español también para la prensa latina, si quieren hablar con usted.
Sí, un poco, sí hablo muy bien, pero como que ya me da un poco de pena. Ha sido un poco tiempo que no he hablado español sobre mi trabajo, pero voy a lanzar y hacer lo mejor que puedo.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Muchísimas gracias, Jody. Joining us, Maria Dominguez is with us. She's the preschool director at Cielito Lindo, Spanish immersion preschool. Maria, I'll ask you in English. I wonder, Maria, if you might give us a little bit of an idea of what you're seeing from your perspective in preschool.
Good morning. Hi, Bob. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I think this is a very important issue that it's affecting not just our Hispanic or immigrant community, but all of us in general, regardless of your status here in the United States. For us as teachers, right now at Cielito Lindo, we are seeing of course, some families that are afraid, right? And even though our kids are little, and like Dr. Jody mentioned, right now, the age 0 to 6 is so important in the life of children. This is when they're developing, when they're building those strong connections with their caregivers, obviously parents. And when this happens and separation happens, we see it in their behavior, how they come in, and just even talking to parents that they're not even leaving their house. They go to work and then they go back. And they try to avoid anything that has to do with being a risk, even if they hold a legal permanent residence, because regardless, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen, but they know that they're here legally, but because of the way they're managing and how they're trying to get everyone, now they're even afraid of that even though they hold a legal status, that they're going to be taken away from their children, and they're filling out those power of attorneys. Right now, I had a former parent that contacted me, and she's like, "What can we do? Should we pass out cards where people can be tracked in case they get pulled over or taken, and that way their family knows where they're at? Um, can we provide them with even delivering food to where they live?" There's so much uncertainty, and the good thing is that hopefully, and one of the things we need to do is make everybody aware, right? The community, that this is really happening. It's not just we're seeing it in our communities, and we're seeing it here in Austin for sure. Every day we see it in the streets. But it's so unfortunate that it's happening to families and and people that we work with every day, especially the children and families that we serve. Yeah.
Maria, I was recently in another metropolis in Texas, talking to a group of early education childcare providers, and they seemed, it was very difficult for them to talk about this, especially they didn't want to talk about it in public because they're so afraid that they're going to be targeted. And I think this is one of the things, as we put this together today, so many groups are afraid of being targeted. And it just is wrong, right, for us to be in a country where we can't speak out. We're supposed to be proud of the ability to speak out. And so I just want to thank you, Maria, for the work that you're doing and for speaking out. Krystal, a last very brief thing. I noticed that a lot of times in the media, some parts of the media, we rationalize that we can be mean to kids and to families. Like there's some larger context here that people aren't getting. There is no larger context when you're talking about being mean to kids and being mean to families. And it's seemingly not the American way. It seems it's the way right now, though. And I wonder if you could contextualize this very briefly for us.
I think that there's a move right now to ensure that I think if you categorize an entire group of people as being criminals, as having evaded the law, then you can get the public to sort of turn a blind eye to the way that those people are treated. And I think I'm hopeful that the mistreatment of children, the abuse of children, the traumatization of children, no matter who their parents are, no matter how they came into the country, is not something that the American public can turn a blind eye to or is willing to turn a blind eye to. I'm hopeful that this is a step too far.
Yeah. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Krystal Gómez from the Texas Immigration Legal Counsel. Thank you so much, Krystal. Jennifer Wolf-Williams from Home. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for being here. Jody Berger Cardoso from the University of Houston School of Social Work. Maria Dominguez from the Cielito Lindo, which is one of the best names ever for a school. Thank you very much, Maria. I want to thank all of you for standing up and moving us forward on this issue. More people, when it comes to kids and family, need to speak out. So thank you all very much. And thank you for the press for covering. Thank you all very much. Thank you, guys.